Right, so more new cases than recovered cases. It's kind of same old. I mean, it's been happening like that for about the last week, but it's the same in that it's only going up in certain areas. The active cases in Edmonton actually, I think, went down by one. So Calgary was at like 640, 650 yesterday. So they're the area that had almost all the new cases. The central zone, the south zone is also going up a little bit, but the vast majority of the active cases are south of Edmonton. I mean, only about a little over 300 of the 1,300 active cases are in the Edmonton area or north of the Edmonton area. So the vast majority of the cases are in and around Calgary. So that's basically the take home point here. And hospitalizations went down a little bit too, I believe. So um, the numbers are up, but they're only up in certain areas. So again, the one, and this is the one thing that I've been bringing up lately, but it's another thing that I've really noticed, and I haven't really thought of it this way yet. And that when you see these increase in cases, I've noticed that pretty well nobody is calling for relocking down or increasing lockdown measures. I've hardly seen anybody do that. The big push nowadays is, oh, mandatory masks and don't send the kids back to school. Like that is the hot topic. That is almost exclusively what people are talking about. And it's very odd too. Like it's very odd that these same people were adamantly against opening up when we were having like 30 cases a day. Um, and they, like I say, they were adamantly against it, but now all of a sudden we're having 100 new cases a day, and they're not for locking down. Like it just one of the other many contradictions I've noticed. And again, it's crazy too that it's the mask stuff that they're resorting to. Like I really don't get it. Like I don't understand. I think it's largely just groupthink. Like it's the classic, the way that sheep kind of operate is it's just plain old groupthink. But there's definitely some more to it as well, and it just kind of fascinates me that people can not only can people hold blatantly contradictory views from the start of this whole pandemic, whatever you want to call it, but they hold entirely contradictory beliefs to stuff they held like a month or 6 weeks ago. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. The numbers out of the states were also up yesterday. They had a very high case amount yesterday, I believe the highest they've had. But again, the death numbers are still relatively steady. They have trended up slightly, but that's only from literally like the lowest amount of deaths they'd had since mid March, from like mid to late June. So, and that's the other thing too, is that I don't think that this is due to, like I've been saying it for a while now, but the evidence clearly doesn't back up that it's due to reopening. I mean, you look at Florida; they were open for what, like 6 weeks, almost, I think almost 2 months before they started seeing an increase, and everyone's saying, "Oh, it's because they opened up too early." No, it really isn't. Same with Arizona too. Like they were one of the first states to open up restaurants and stuff like that. I remember this was like May sometime. And again, the increases in cases it hasn't happened, over the last like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So there's no, unless you're willing to argue that there's a 1 month to 6 week incubation period, it's not due to reopening. It's clearly due to other factors. I think the protests definitely played a little bit into it, but I think the majority is just the government's lying about numbers. They're inflating it to a degree, and we know that's the case. There's no conspiracy theory there. We have several stories backing that up. And they're just testing more people. I mean, the states are testing. I think they're testing over 500,000 people a day. Like, of course you're going to get a lot of tests. So, anyway, that's pretty much the numbers. Again, the numbers out of the rest of Canada. Ontario's pretty steady. Quebec's pretty. I don't remember seeing their numbers yesterday though, but I know from 2 days ago they were both about where they were before. Um, BC's, the numbers are going up a little bit there, but that's also due to more isolated incidents. Again, that's another way that you don't really need to worry is if they're largely just isolated areas that are having an increase in cases. Like, I mean, you have one business where there's 50 cases and everyone goes crazy, but the good news is that you can trace all of those people very easily. If you have increases in cases in hundreds of areas, well, then that's going to be tough to trace. But when you have increases in isolated areas, it's really not that hard to figure out. And again, want to talk a little bit more about the whole mandatory mask garbage. And this is from Dan Bongino, and he says liberal media hacks keep talking about the science behind masks while refusing to quote the actual science on masks. Weird. And that's the thing too, is that I've never heard one of these people for mandatory masks talk about the science behind masks. Again, it's the same thing as the whole social distancing thing. It sounds like it works, therefore people just assume that it must work. But the reality is that it doesn't. Number one, because there's no evidence that shows that making healthy people wear masks does less harm than good. Um, or more good than harm. And the other problem too is that number one, a lot of the masks are faulty. I mean, we got a whole like I don't know how many. I think it was a very large supply of masks that were completely faulty from China. How do we not? How do we know that we? I mean, we may know a month from now and be like, hey, yeah, the last million masks that we brought into Canada are completely faulty, and we were like that. That has happened multiple times. The other thing too is that the masks that most people, at least that I see, are wearing aren't the medical grade masks. And the problem with those too is that there's even less evidence that show that those work. The actual medical grade masks, if you're sick, it is probably a good idea to wear a mask. There is some evidence that shows that that helps. The problem too is that you can't wear the same mask all the time as well, because that can do more harm than good as well. There's so many aspects to this too, and the other thing too is that the fact that most people are constantly touching, even if you're not constantly, even if you do it only once or twice, that still completely defeats the purpose of wearing a mask. And it's the same thing too with I see these complete and utter idiots that are talking about, oh, the kids can't go back to school unless they're wearing masks. And like, are you honestly that stupid that you think that like 6 and 7 year old kids are gonna wear a mask and not touch their face? Like, are you insane? Like, it just the delusional world that these people live in, it's very, very insane. Like, you actually think that like 6 and 7 year old even high school kids are going to wear a mask to school and actually use it properly? Like, how insane do you actually have to be to believe that? Like, I really have no words. Like, I really have no words. um, and this is another crazy story in that Nova Scotia makes masks mandatory in most indoor public spaces. Now, um, if you're not from the area, and I'm not from the area either, but you probably don't know, but there's literally only one active case in Nova Scotia. There is one active case, and yet they're still making masks mandatory. Again, this just goes to show the paranoid, delusional world that these people live in that support this kind of stuff, and the idea that it has nothing to do with public safety. It has nothing to do with public safety. There is one active case. You don't need to. It shouldn't even be a question, let alone actually be going through. So, it's rather insane. Like it's rather insane. And again, you have all these people that they actually can look at you with a straight face and tell you this is about public safety. No, it isn't. It's about control. Um, Again, like I say, the people have and the governments have completely they've completely abandoned the law support. I mean, they still do it, but they're not doing it as overtly as they did before. Talking about the lockdowns, and they've completely shifted now to the whole let's make masks mandatory and we can't send the kids back to school and all that kind of stuff. Um, that's what they've shifted to because it's so obvious it's not even funny that they were wrong about the lockdowns, that they have to shift to something else that they're going to be wrong about. Like it really shocks me. Like you'd think these people would be tired of being wrong, but I guess not. They're gonna try again. So this is another story here. We Charity moved millions to private Kielburger Company, and again they're the people that run the whole We Charity. And again, this is exactly what we thought it was. I mean, this is not like this is breaking news. I think most people that are following this story kind of know where it's at. In that this was clearly a just a blatant money laundering operation, a classic example of corporate cronyism. And again, this is just the millionth example, it seems, of all these leftists that complain about the right being corporate greed, and they're given tax breaks to the corporations, and they only care about the rich corporate people. Um, when in reality, that's complete and utter BS. Not in that they're not right to an extent. They do overstate. just how much it goes on and the extent of it. They definitely overstate that. And they pretend like it doesn't happen the other way around. And again, their argument is literally basic human psychology only applies to one side of the political spectrum. Like that's literally what they're arguing, which is absolutely and utterly beyond insane. Like it is beyond insane to argue that, oh well, basic human psychology only applies to one side of the political spectrum, but that's stupid. It applies to everyone pretty much the same. And the reason why they don't want to acknowledge that, again, is people on the right are more likely to recognize that power naturally corrupts people, not all the time, but the more it basically human incentive is human greed or human compassion, human kindness, um, the whole good versus bad argument. It's driven by incentive. And the problem is that the more power there is available for an individual, the more of an incentive there is to abuse said power, and that is the problem. And that's the reason why I just absolutely scoff and completely dismiss anytime the left complains about corporate greed and this garbage and giving their oil buddies money and tax breaks. I could care less because their solution to it won't fix the problem. Like it won't, and not only that, they literally pretend like the problem only exists on one side of the spectrum. And that the thing too is that um, my solution to it would just be to, okay, let's just give the government a lot less power to do stuff like this, and wouldn't you know it, government wouldn't do as much kind of stuff like this because they don't have the power to do it. Um, when the government can literally just print up a bunch of money and give it to their friends, of course they're gonna do it. Like, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. I just can't stand that. And the last thing to point out here is the family that owns the New York Times were slave owners or slave holders. Again, we're canceling. I think this is something I brought up before too, but I wanted to bring it up again just to kind of make my point again. But um, again, we're canceling anybody who was involved with slavery and racism and all this, that, and the other. But yet we're only doing it in certain circumstances too. Like we're not canceling Justin Trudeau for wearing blackface multiple times, but if Trump wore blackface multiple times, or if Andrew Scheer or Maxime Bernier, yeah, their political career would be over. Again, so it's just a blatant double standard. We're only, again, imagine if the people who founded Fox News were slave owners. Again, of course, that would be a terrible PR. That'd be a PR nightmare for them. But again, New York Times and people could care less. So anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to bring up here. If you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my PayPal and email. Got linked in the description. Again, uh, very least, just hit that like and subscribe. And again, last few things, check me out on Twitter, BitChute, and Parlay.